Ivy. We both know we live in an era where society tends to like the familiar.
I don't believe original expression should ever be familiar. This art, it ends up being trapped by it. Sure, there is craft, maybe even hints of talent. Certainly an obvious desire to be original. I want to know what that feels like. True originality can't be forced into existence simply by desiring it.
And stop. Let's pause this moment. What do you see? A close-up, the foreground in focus, the background soft, depth, dimension, texture. But is there something else about this image that makes it unique? Let's try another one. Here's a wider shot. Look at the relationship of the foreground characters compared to the background. Look at the environment on the left and right sides of frame. Now look what happens when I switch to this image. Believe it or not, these images are shot using the exact same lens. And as I go back and forth, you'll notice the characters don't change in size, but the background appears closer in one image and further in the other. What is happening here? Let's try one more. What about these two close-ups? There are subtle differences in performance and framing, but beyond that, do they look different to you? Notice the fall off in his shoulder, the collar, even his ear. Now, there technically isn't a wrong answer here, and it doesn't matter if you prefer the left or the right. The question I'm asking is, do these images look different? And if so, why? This is a story about change, the kind that happens when consumer taste changes, or the kind of change when something familiar faces off with something new. In the world of filmmaking, some people are looking to get the best quality. Some want good quality for less money. Others want flexibility. Some want speed. And then there are those who simply want their work to stand out in a crowd. I want them all. And this story might surprise you because, well, it surprised me. We decided to put to the test a brand new camera, paired with a brand new lens and wrapped it in a brand new post-production workflow. And as with any real experiment, this is a story where we didn't know what would happen until we actually did it. This is the new Fujifilm Gfx Eterna 55. It's small, lightweight, and extremely power efficient. We rigged it with a cage made by Wooden Camera, which gave us extra power ports and used the new Tilt-A-Nucleus M2 follow focus kit. This IMAX certified camera is very compact, balanced, and easy to move around. And like every other digital camera, the Eterna 55 has a CMOS sensor. But behind the lens mount in this camera isn't just any sensor. It's one of the largest sensors available in any motion picture camera. And just a special note about this episode, we're gonna dive deep into some math and geometry, so fair warning. Okay, so how big is this sensor? Well, it's all in the name. The sensor is roughly 44 millimeters wide and 33 millimeters tall. The diagonal is 55 millimeters, hence Eterna 55, which contributes to why it's officially an IMAX certified digital camera. But what does that actually mean? Well, how about we compare this to one of the largest formats for motion picture capture in the world, 65 millimeter film. Think Lawrence of Arabia, 2001: A Space Odyssey, or even parts of The Dark Knight or Interstellar. Recently, at the 2026 Oscars, the movie Sinners made history when cinematographer Autumn Durrell-Darkapah, ASC, won the Oscar for Best Cinematography, combining IMAX and Ultra Panavision 70, which used 65 millimeter film to record. When exposed vertically, 65 millimeter film, once you remove the sprocket holes, gives you a usable diagonal area of about 57 millimeters. So if we go no further, Fujifilm Eterna 55 already makes it possible to capture ultra-large format motion picture images similar to that of 65 millimeter films. But what does that actually mean? And how does this compare to already available cameras? Well, to understand this better, we can look at the flagship camera of the professional cinematography industry, the Alexa 35. Arri's cameras have become the industry standard for a lot of great reasons. But just like the name says, it has a 35 millimeter sensor. Now, Arri also makes other great cameras with large sensors, but the 35 is their most recent flagship camera. What I want to learn is if a sensor changes what a lens is doing, does that ultimately change how the image feels? Well, in order to find out, we need to do some tests on a real movie set. And that means we're going to have to tell a story. This short film is called Work in Progress. Cinematographer Shannon Stutenroth and our crew are going to turn this warehouse space into a movie set.
Hey, Timber.
Our story takes place at an art gallery where two strangers meet. One likes the art on display, the other hates it. Now, this story gives us the chances to properly test three main things. First, we want to see what visually changes when recording on the Eterna 55 large format sensor. Second, we want to test the dynamic range of Eterna 55 and examine how the color, contrast, and skin tones behave. And third, we want to test the Eterna 55 post-production workflow using the brand new Strada Connect remote editing technology. So let's start with testing the 55mm sensor. Remember, Eterna 55 is one of the largest cinema sensors available on the market. But there's another unique element about this camera that's really interesting. The Eterna 55 sensor aspect ratio is 1.33 to 1. Now, full-frame camera sensors are roughly 20% smaller in size, plus they're a 1.5 to 1 aspect ratio. The most common aspect ratio for narrative storytelling is still 16:9. So when you use a full-frame sensor and need to deliver HD or UHD, you typically have to crop a large portion of that sensor. But with Fujifilm, the Eterna 55 sensor is so large that if you wanted to crop 16:9, the image area is still larger than the original full-frame height. That alone is an advantage in terms of Eterna 55's format flexibility. But what happens if I want to use all of this huge 133 sensor and still deliver 16:9? Well, to do that, we need to call our friends at Panavision. Panavision is the global leader of professional motion picture camera systems, lenses, and imaging technology. They not only support filmmakers with advanced equipment, they have been trailblazing the art of optical storytelling since the 1950s, and they recently raised the bar again with the Ultra Panatar II. So what makes these lenses so special? Well, first, the UP2s are designed to cover the enormous image circle of Fujifilm Eterna 55. Remember, most lenses won't do that. Second, they have the perfect amount of chromatic aberration, which produces subtle color fringing. This essentially blends colors together, surgically breaking down images so you get smoother faces that remain in focus and help reduce some of the clarity of modern sensors. And third, this lens is anamorphic. And it's not just a typical anamorphic, it has a squeeze factor of 1.3, which is traditionally considered a weak squeeze. But Panavision engineered these lenses to produce the feeling of a stronger anamorphic squeeze. Normally, when you rack focus, spherical lenses have a circular bokeh, which means the background seems calm, natural, and familiar. But the UP2s display elliptical bokeh, which is more dreamlike, expressive, and surreal. Again, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but when you're trying to create images that stand out on their own, what I'm seeing is a new visual combination begin to emerge here, and the math is going to tell us why. If we take the Eterna 55 sensor, which we already know is an aspect ratio of 1.33 to 1, and multiply it by the Panavision UP2 lens, which is 1.3, we get 1.73 to 1. That's 97% of 16:9, meaning we can shoot the entire open gate sensor. And with a tiny 3% crop, we get a full UHD image that is roughly the same recording area when shooting 65mm film. So what you're seeing here is the Eterna 55 in open gate mode with the Panavision Ultra Panatar II making use of the entire large format sensor. The 1.3 squeeze initially makes images appear tall and narrow, but once we de-squeeze by 33%, we get 16:9 with virtually no cropping. Let's add a base LUT to normalize the image, and right away, I think these pictures coming off the camera are lovely. Now if we add a color grade, this combination looks stunning. Somehow it's both soft and sharp, but at the same time, the size of the sensor gives these images their own sense of scale. And rack focuses like these carry the right amount of visual intensity, but the lens breathing remains completely under control. Now, even though Panavision is the world leader in anamorphic lenses, they aren't the only company in the world that makes a lens with a 1.3 squeeze. And if you want your images to stand out, color correction alone just isn't enough these days. What I'm doing here is I'm pairing a 1.3 anamorphic lens with a 55mm sensor, and that's creating something new, and I'll be honest, it's coming to us with very little effort. But I still want to know more. Even with these unique characteristics, there's yet another aspect of this arrangement that unlocks something totally different, something totally new. If you've ever shot medium format or large format stills, you know that a larger negative or a larger sensor changes the field of view of the focal length of a lens. Sometimes people think that large format is exclusively designed to be used when you're capturing like huge images, large areas like landscapes and ultra wide vistas. But in many ways, large format can be even more valuable in small spaces, where the geometry of a big sensor can change the geometry of a small room. Shannon and I have never shot this sensor before. We never shot on something this big, so we wanted to see the difference between a lens mounted on the Eterna 55 and the same lens mounted on the Alexa 35. In order to document all the geometric changes, we rigged an iPhone about 14 feet in the air so we could see everything that's happening from a bird's eye view. We used the Blackmagic Cinema Camera app to record overhead, and we could remotely control it from the ground on an iPad. Next, we need to creatively frame the shot. This moment is where our two characters sit beside each other in the art gallery and have a disagreement about the work on display. This is the Eterna 55 mounted with the Panavision Ultra Panatar II using a 65mm focal length at a wide open aperture of a t2.8. Now for our comparison test, we're going to remove the background actors so we can examine the geometric changes a little bit easier. If we switch to the overhead shot, we can see where the dolly landed in relation to our actors. The camera focus plane is 11 feet 8 inches away from the actors. We also have a wall several feet behind us. So the 65mm Panavision UP2 field of view looks like this. Okay, this is a great shot for our key moment in our story. But what would happen if we swap out the Eterna 55 camera for the Alexa 35? Our camera crew is going to keep the dolly locked in place, and we're going to put the Alexa 35 in the exact same spot, 11 feet 8 inches away from the actors. And then we're going to put the same 65mm lens we just had on Eterna 55 and
Alpha 1 Kilo Take 2 B cam work.
Well, that's interesting. Since the Alexa 35 sensor is roughly 40% smaller in size, the lens field of view becomes roughly 40% narrower. What we're experiencing here is called a crop factor. Since the lens hasn't changed and the camera hasn't moved, the lens always projects the same image circle. What's happening is the Alexa records a smaller area of that image circle. This creates a ratio in the frame sizes. The Eterna 55 width is 44mm. The Alexa 35 width is 28mm. If we divide 44 by 28, we get a crop factor of roughly 1.6. This means the same lens on Eterna 55 will always look about 1.6 times narrower when it's mounted on the Alexa 35. That's why we can't use this shot on the Alexa 35. So obviously, what other options do we have to make the Alexa 35 work in this shot? Well, the first option is to switch to a wider lens. So we're going to remove the 65mm UP2 and put on a 40mm UP2. If you do the math, the 40mm is roughly 40% wider than the 65. But it's not perfect, and the crop factor is still a little too tight. So in order to match the exact framing we set up with the Eterna 55, we had to pull the dolly back about 2 feet. So from this perspective, we can use our overhead camera to help us match our original field of view. The camera focal plane is moving back from 11 feet 8 inches to 13 feet 7 inches. And here's the Alexa 35 with the Ultra Panatar II 40mm. And it looks great. And a side-by-side comparison allows us to verify these images are almost identical. The subjects line up and the eye lines match. But if we go full screen and we switch between them, even though the subjects are the same size, the backgrounds begin to change dramatically. And remember, the Eterna 55 is closer to these subjects on a longer focal length, whereas the Alexa 35 is further from the subjects on a wider focal length. This shows how significant the crop factor is. Now again, there's no wrong answer here, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. What I am saying is that there's a significant difference which might unlock something creatively unique. The most obvious change here is the background appears further away on the Eterna than it does on Alexa. This relationship also affects the depth of field. You can see the background of the Eterna appears more out of focus, whereas the background of the Alexa appears more in focus. You can also see the geometry of their faces change. The faces on Eterna look rounder on the 65mm lens, whereas the faces on the Alexa appear more elongated because the 40mm wider focal length has more distortion. In other words, the longer lens on Eterna 55 has less depth of field, and the magnification factor gives it a wider field of view, thus creating more separation and more dimension even when the cameras are almost exactly in the same place. But you're probably saying, well, Michael, you changed the lens. Of course they don't match. A 40mm focal length is always going to have more depth of field than a 65 focal length. Of course. So what if we really wanted to use the exact same lens on both cameras? Well, we already know that the Alexa 35 sensor is going to reduce the field of view by 40%. So in order to match the same field of view, we need to back the camera up. How much? Well, we can figure that out by using the same crop factor arithmetic. We started at 11.7 feet away. If we multiply that by a crop factor of 1.6, we get 18.7, which means the focal plane is now almost 19 feet away. So in order for the exact same lens on Eterna 55 to match Alexa 35, we had to back up an additional 7 feet. And now we're totally up against the wall. Okay, so here is the Alexa 35. Everything here looks great. A side-by-side composite verifies that our alignment, sizing, and geometric balance matches. But because we had to back up so much and the Alexa 35 sensor is so much smaller, the background actually compresses even more. So when I switch between them, Alexa 35's background looks closer and Eterna 55's background looks even further. Notice the subjects don't change, and again, both cameras have the exact same lens. And I'm not saying the Alexa looks bad. It doesn't. It just looks different. In fact, if you want your image to look packed closer together, the Alexa 35 is a great way to create that illusion. But if your goal is to add more depth and more dimension, it's easy to see there's a notable difference. In fact, the 55mm sensor size also has advantages with other aspect ratios. Because the field of view is wider, it offers more flexibility when being reformatted. For example, if you've ever needed to make portrait extractions in 9:16, you might feel vertical cropping makes pictures a little claustrophobic. If we do a 9:16 extraction on the Alexa 35, the narrower field of view means the portrait subject is going to be compressed against the background and have less visible environment on the sides. But the same extraction and the same subject size on the Eterna 55 shows more separation from the background and more visible environment. It's subtle, but if we look at these side by side, you may find that the size of the Eterna 55 sensor gives you this sense of more space when working with constricted aspect ratios. But as always, you get to be the judge. Alexa is an amazing camera, and cinematographers tell great stories and win awards all day long with Arri's incredible tools. The points I'm making here are all subjective, and if dimensionality and separation is a creative style that you want, a 55mm sensor offers some options that a 35mm sensor cannot. I personally like having the optical advantage of being closer to a subject while being on a longer focal length and still having wider field of view. But it's not wrong if you feel this separation to be less appealing. That's why you can always crop the Fuji 55 sensor down to closely match the gate of an Alexa 35 or any full-frame camera. Okay, we have then examined everything about the Eterna 55 sensor, what it can do from a geometric perspective. But let's move to part 2, where we examine the dynamic range and color reproduction. The highest quality setting you can capture with the camera is ProRes HQ. ProRes HQ is a 10-bit format that uses intra-frame compression, which means each frame is compressed independently. ProRes HQ is also a 422 format. What that means is luminance is sampled for every pixel, represented by the 4, and chroma is sampled for every 2 pixels. So while this common subsampling does affect color resolution, the dynamic range is largely unaffected. If raw recording is critical to your workflow, Eterna 55 can record raw through an external recorder. The Atomos Ninja TX is a small, lightweight onboard monitor that records ProRes RAW through the HDMI or SDI ports. And while raw recording does have advantages, it's not always necessary. Both ProRes HQ and ProRes RAW have almost identical file sizes at around 1 gigabit per second. But is there a visible difference? Well, to gain a strong understanding of that, we need to go to a professional colorist and see what they have to say. We're going to be working with an incredibly talented freelance colorist, Nick LaRoe. First, let's look at the ProRes HQ shot. We see the log here, which is Fuji's new wide gamut called F-Log 2C. The 2C represents Fuji's new wider color space. So let's apply an F-Log 2C LUT as our base grade. 2C improves the color reproduction of high chroma colors, which should translate to more color accuracy and better skin tones. And then after some sculpting, we created our preferred look.
We also know that society tends to like the familiar.
Now let's switch to the next shot, which is recorded in ProRes RAW. Since we already built a LUT and a grade, we should be able to paste this on top of the shot. And since it's important to have a reference, we had our crew also swap out the Eterna 55 for the Alexa 35 and shot the same take in Arri RAW, since we all know Arri RAW is a high-quality RAW format. Let's look at these even closer. If we compare the three of these in 4K resolution, while there are subtle differences in framing and performance, the quality differences are not immediately evident. If we blow these up and compare them even closer, we can begin to see some differences. Sorry, Richard. The skin tones all have complex colors. They look great. This means the color differences aren't affecting the image all that much. But what about compression? Let's examine an area that is out of focus where the colors are similar. At a 500% blow-up, the differences are slightly more obvious. On Eterna 55, the grain on the ProRes RAW is the most fine of the three. The compression of the ProRes HQ softens the grain structure a bit, and the Alexa looks somewhere in the middle. Now, this result doesn't represent every possible shooting condition, but for this production where we could control the lighting for each setup, Nick didn't have any issues between the ProRes and the RAW. So RAW recording may be useful for some productions, but recording ProRes HQ, it has its advantages. It makes workflow really straightforward. That being said, it's important for you to do your own tests and see which of these combinations are the right fit. Okay, so where are we now? Well, we've looked at how the new Eterna 55 sensor is unlocking these unique geometric options. We've also looked at pairing the Eterna 55 with this 1.3 anamorphic lens from Panavision, the Ultra Panatar II. And then we looked at color control with the new F-Log 2C. But on some level, none of that matters if this camera is hard to work with in post. That's why part 3 is all about post-production workflow. And we are going to introduce an entirely new way of working that has literally never been done before: remote editing using the brand new Strada Connect. Okay, one of the best things about the Eterna 55 is that it's capable of dual recording. We already learned we can capture OpenGate ProRes files in log, but we can also set the camera to capture simultaneous proxy files in H.264. Some cameras, like Arri Alexa, don't offer any form of proxy recording. So those cameras require an extra step in post before you can view anything. But many cameras do offer in-camera proxy files. And there are two specific things I like about Eterna that help simplify post workflow. Eterna 55 captures hero ProRes files and proxy files onto the same media card. We're recording onto OWC Atlas Ultra CF Express Type B memory cards. These cards are so reliable and fast, they have no issue capturing both the ProRes and H.264 proxies at the same time. When we give these files to our DIT Urban Olsen, he's able to mount them through his OWC Atlas CF Express readers. We've connected them to the new OWC Envoy Ultra drives. These Thunderbolt 5 drives are bus-powered and capable of write speeds over 5 gigabytes per second. With embedded cables, these waterproof and dustproof drives are ideal for downloading in the field. But what I also love about the way Fujifilm formats their cards is they separate the proxy files into their own folders. Some cameras put the hero and proxies together, which adds an additional step of media management. But with Eterna 55, if we look at magazine A001, we can click on the folder called Clip, and we can see 12 log ProRes files, which total about 225 gigabytes of total media. But on the same card, if I go to the folder called Proxy, we see the same 12 files. But since these are H.264 files, they're less than 3 gigabytes in size. A further inspection shows these files are encoded in camera at about 12 megabits per second. That's roughly 80 times smaller than the ProRes files, which are closer to 1 gigabit per second. Best of all, these files are edit ready because they share the same timecode and clip name as the originals, only with a _P appended at the end. That means you can instantly edit with the proxy files generated in camera and then relink them later to the ProRes hero files after you've locked your cut. But that can only happen after you've delivered your files physically to an editor, right? Not exactly. That's where Strada Connect comes into the picture. Strada Connect is the world's first peer-to-peer remote editing technology. What that means is the proxy files generated in the camera can be shared with anyone in the world through a virtual file system. Here's how it works. Even though we're on a set in downtown Los Angeles, our production office is located miles away in Hollywood. In our office is a 140 terabyte OWC Thunder Bay, which is where we store all of our content. Before we start shooting, I installed a Strada agent and connected my Thunder Bay RAID by clicking the checkbox. Then in Strada, I navigated to the folder containing this episode and invited Urban to a folder called Edit. Now when we're on the set, Urban can directly view the folder he was invited to in the Thunder Bay in my office and has permission to create new folders, where he then starts transferring the Eterna proxy files along with the audio broadcast wave files directly from his cart to our Hollywood office. Because this is peer-to-peer, there's no cloud used in this transfer. And since the proxy files are so small, internet bandwidth isn't a factor. With every card delivered to Urban from the camera crew, he transfers proxies directly to the Thunder Bay in our office. But I can invite other collaborators to the Thunder Bay. And the editor for this project is Ryan Connolly, the creator and host of Film Riot, who is nearly 1,500 miles away in Dallas, Texas. As an editor and director with a remote team, Ryan knows how important workflow is.
I don't want my filmmaking process to feel different because of tech. I want tech to make my filmmaking process easier. We have people all over the place, so toying around with something that does this, seeing this emerging thing, that's always going to be a big draw for me.
Ryan is using the brand new Strada Connect to literally mount the OWC Thunder Bay in Los Angeles on his computer.
The experiment was, can you edit remotely feeling like you're right in the exact same room? And I'm seeing stuff come right in as if I was on set with you, as if I had a trailer outside and I was your on-location editor. So that process of almost feeling like someone's just bringing me a drive from 10 feet away, was absolutely insane.
Now, there's several advantages of this workflow, starting with the fact there was no file transferring or uploading from the Thunder Bay required for Ryan to edit.
I just treated it like any other project. I opened my Premiere project, I set that up how I wanted to, and then I just imported the footage right from Strada.
Everything he did was virtualized directly from the Thunder Bay in Los Angeles to Dallas, Texas.
It felt like a hard drive connected to my actual computer. It didn't have any issues. It really had no lag. It was moving like you would expect it to move if you weren't remote. So that, again, was the game changer that really blew me away the most, that I'm inside of an actual project in Premiere and I'm editing something that is not on my local system in any way. I don't like to use that word a lot. Game changer is thrown around quite a bit, but this is absolutely that.
And if you want to learn more about how this happened, check out the full interview on our channel. And even this edit, the entire thing was cut in Final Cut Pro on my laptop in 4K, referencing nearly 7 terabytes of footage, and none of it was uploaded to a cloud, and I never transferred anything to a local drive. I'm not exaggerating. This entire episode was edited on this laptop without direct attached storage and without uploading anything to a cloud, all using Strada Connect. Wow, that was a big episode. But my hope is that if you're a filmmaker, there's something here for everyone to learn. We all know there's no such thing as a perfect camera, but the better approach is to find a camera that really is perfect for your needs. I find the Fujifilm Eterna 55 ticks several new boxes, and some of those boxes are at a price point that almost no camera on the market is offering. And that price point thing, it actually reminded me of something. About 20 years ago, the most popular film format was Super 35. And then a new company came out called Red, and they brought a $17,000 camera to the market that made Super 35 recording accessible for independent filmmakers, largely for the first time. Today, filmmaking has shifted towards larger format acquisition, which is why people line up to see films like Oppenheimer and Sinners shot on IMAX and 65mm film, or One Battle After Another and Begonia shot in VistaVision. And now that every digital camera has made 35 and full frame easy, Hollywood has had to up-level their game to inspire a new emotional response. And part of how they're doing that is with larger format cinematography. Well, Fujifilm is making 65mm cinematography accessible to independent filmmakers. And after everything we've examined today, I find the best part is it automatically comes with a workflow that virtually everybody can integrate.